Hello everyone. So in this episode, we are going to implement a shared VPC architecture to reduce our AWS cost and simplify our AWS network. Now, if you watch my previous video, I have already given an introduction to shared VPC, and also we did some comparison between VPC peering, transit gateway and shared VPC. And we also talked about the benefits of shared VPC, like simplifying our network and help to reduce our AWS costs and so on. So if you haven't watched that video, I'll put a link up here. Please watch that video before because I think that will help you to set the foundation for this video if you don't know about shared VPC. So what are we going to cover today in this video? First and foremost, we are going to create multiple AWS accounts. 2 AWS account for that matter, and we'll be using AWS Organization to create and manage this account because that is one of the easiest way in AWS to manage multiple accounts. And after that, we will be logging into one of those accounts and we'll call that production account, and in that account we will create a VPC which will be shared across all other AWS accounts. So in this VPC we are going to create all our VPC resources like subnets, route tables, internet gateways, NAT gateways, although some of these resources we won't be using for this demo, but we'll be creating that anyways. And next, we'll be using AWS Resource Access Manager, or for short we call it AWS RAM, to share this VPC with our development account. So the development account can also use our VPC resources like NAT gateways and so on. And also, I'm going to show you how to share other resources as well. For example, in this demo, I will be sharing an Elasticsearch cluster which is originally spin up in the production account with our development account. So, the Lambda functions in both the accounts can index data into the same Elasticsearch to different Elasticsearch indexes. So, I'll be sharing that as well because that will really help you to reduce your cost. Otherwise, like you need to have multiple Elasticsearch clusters in both the accounts. But one thing you have to remember is you have to make sure that proper measures are taken to logically separate these two indexes. Otherwise, that's going to be a disaster. Alright, so these are the main things I'm going to cover in this video. I hope you guys are excited to reduce some of your AWS cost. If so, I'll see you in the other side. Okay, now this is our shared VPC architecture. We have these 2 AWS account, production and development. And then in the production account, we are going to create this VPC and share it with the development account as I already mentioned. And then for that particular VPC, we are creating all the subnets and NAT gateways, internet gateways, and all that VPC based resources. So both this account can share that. And we are going to create an Elasticsearch cluster. And this Elasticsearch cluster will be used by both production Lambda and the development Lambda, which is inside this shared VPC in the private subnet. And hey, not only our lambdas are in the private subnet, but also we will be configuring our Elasticsearch cluster inside the private subnet as well. So the communication between our Elasticsearch and the lambda will happen inside the VPC. So the lambdas won't communicate over the internet, but it will communicate through the AWS backbone network, which is really a secure way. Now, if these lambdas and Elasticsearch are in the private subnet, how are we going to access it? Well, you guessed it right. That is through an API gateway. So we'll create 2 API gateway for our account A and account B. So our production users can use the account A API gateway to connect to production lambdas, and our developers can use account B API gateway to connect to our development lambdas. And hey, we are not going to create this production Fargate or development Fargate cluster. So we'll be essentially not using our NAT gateway, but I created for the sake of completeness of this video. And if you need to connect to internet from the resources that is inside the private subnet, such as EC2 instances, Fargate, tasks, and so on, you can obviously use it. Alright, so now let's get into our AWS console and start implementing it. Alright, now let's go to AWS Organizations and then start creating 2 accounts, one for production and one for development. So I'll click create account and then I'll give it a name production, and also I'll give it an email address and an IAM role. Now this IAM role is really important to switch between production and development very easily. I'll give some tags as well, name production for this production account, and I'm going to create this. So if you do a refresh, you will see immediately your account is active. Here we go, production. And then I'll go ahead and create my development account as well, development, and the email address and also an IAM role. So this is again useful to switch between development and production account. And I'll show you how to do that as well. I'll give it a tag as well called development. All right. So let's refresh it again. So I will see both the accounts are now active. Here's my development account and the production account. All right. Now I will sign out from my master account and log in with an IAM user. So I can easily do the account switching. So let me go ahead and log in with this user. And now the account switch role option is available. So I can just click on there, and then actually I have noted the account IDs and the account role in a separate place. So I can just add the production account ID and the production account role, which we assigned earlier, that is production role, and some display name and also color for the label really. And I switch it, then do you see the color and the label is shown. And in the same way, I can switch it to my development account. So let me go ahead and click switch role again, and I'll copy the development details, that is the account ID and the role. So account ID, I paste it there, and the role, development role, some name and also some color for the label, and then switch role. Here we go. So I see the development label there, and I also see the production label there. So now I will switch to production account. Now I am in the production account, as you can see. So I'll start creating the VPC. Now this is the VPC we are going to share among our account. That means our development account and the production account. So at the moment I have the default VPC. I'm going ahead and create a new VPC. So let's call it YouTube VPC. And I'm assigning a CIDR block 10.0.0/60 CIDR. And I think this looks all good. So I'll just create the VPC. And now I want to verify whether the DNS resolution is enabled for this VPC. So our Lambdas can privately communicate with our Elasticsearch. So I'll go ahead and check whether it's enabled. Yes, it is enabled. So I just save the changes, done. So next I will go ahead and create my subnets. So I'll click subnets there. And once it's loaded, I'm going to go ahead and create a new subnet. So let's call this YouTube private subnet, and I'll select the VPC. Make sure to select the VPC we just created, and I'm not going to prefer any availability zone, but I have to select the CIDR for this. So here I say 10.0.1.0/24. I'm go ahead and create this one. Okay, so that's created, and do you see it's now created, YouTube private. So I will create the public subnet as well. So let's say YouTube public, and the VPC, make sure to select the new VPC, no preference, and CIDR block 10.0.2.0/24. Okay, and I will create that subnet. So these subnets will have 255 IP addresses that are unique. Okay, now let's go ahead and create our internet gateway. So I'll go to internet gateway and then click create new internet gateway. We'll call it YouTube IGW for internet gateway, and I just create it. And once it is created, you can see the state is detached. So I'm gonna go ahead and attach it. So I'll select the internet gateway. So I'll go to actions and attach to VPC. So I select my YouTube VPC and then click attach internet gateway. Okay, now it's attached. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and create NAT gateway as well, although we are not using for this demo. So I'll go ahead and click create NAT gateway and give it a name. And it is important to select the public subnet for the NAT gateway so that it can talk to the internet gateway. So make sure you select the public subnet there and also allocate a elastic IP. So that is a requirement for our net gateway. And then yeah, make sure you select the public subnet and create the net gateway. And one thing to note, guys, you will be charged as soon as you create a net gateway. So make sure you remove it end of this demo. Next, let's go ahead and create our route tables for our public subnet and private subnet. Let's start by creating our private route table. Associate with the YouTube VPC. You can give it a tag. This private route table will be later assigned to the private subnet. Okay, and I'm going ahead and create it. Here we go. And next, let's go ahead and create our public route table. So I'll call it YouTube public RT and select the VPC, YouTube VPC, and some tag. This will be associated with our public subnet. Okay, now before association, let's go ahead and configure the route for public and private. First, public route table. The local routes is associated with the VPC, and any other routes, that means 0.0.0/0, any other IP address will be directed to the internet gateway. Create that, close it. And for our private route table as well, let's configure the routes. So at the moment, it is locally being resolved for all the IPs within the VPC. For any other IP denoted by 0.0.0/0 will be routed to the NAT gateway. So I'll select the NAT gateway and pick the NAT gateway we just created and save the routes. Perfect. So both route tables are now configured, public and private. Now let's associate it with our subnets. So I will go to subnets and first let's pick the public subnet. Go to the route table. Now there's a default route table associated already. So let's change it to the public route table we just created and then save it. Okay. And this public route table is now associated with our internet gateway as well, as you have seen it. And then I will go ahead and edit the route table for the public subnet as well. Sorry, private subnet as well. And it is associated with the NAT gateway right now. And I'll save it. With that, our VPC resources are now properly configured. So next, let's go ahead and create our Elasticsearch. So that is Elasticsearch we are going to share with both our production and development account. So I'll go to Elasticsearch service and I'll go ahead and create a new domain inside my production account. So I'll just go ahead and click that. So let's select a development and testing. So I don't want to over provision for this demo. I'll select the latest Elasticsearch version 7.8 and then click next. And now let's give it a name for the domain. So let's say YouTube ES. I'll pick an instance type for our data nodes. Let me pick one small one. I think T2 small should do. And we will only have one node. You of course should have multiple. And as you can see, the T2 small instance is not supporting encryption. That's fine. Let's click next. And this is the important part. So you have to select the network configuration. So I'll select VPC access. But if you want to have public access, just select that. Then it will be publicly available. But I wanted to have it in my VPC. I select the VPC and also the subnet. So here I'm going to select private subnet again. And also I will associate it with a security group. So with this security group, we can define who can access our Elasticsearch, and we'll edit that security group to enable access from our production account as well as from our development account. But for this, let's just select the default security group. Here we go. And the rest seems okay. As you can see, the encryption is not supported. That's all right. And to select the access policy for my Elasticsearch domain. So I'm going to go ahead and select open access to the domain because I already have the VPC and the security group to establish any authorization. So that's enough for me. So if you need any fine grain level authorization, you can select a different access policy, but that's all right for me. And then I'll click just next. So in the overview section, I can review the configuration. You can see it is inside the VPC in the private subnet. That's good. And the access policy, it is open access. All my AWS services can talk to my Elasticsearch domain. So here's the ARN to the domain. Looks all good. Then I'll go ahead and click confirm. So it will start creating the Elasticsearch domain, but it's not going to create just immediately. It will take about 10 minutes, as you can see. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and create some other resource. Well, next, I will go to my AWS console landing page and I'll start creating Resource Access Manager Resource Share, or AWS RAM for short. Now, this is the main service that allows us to share resources between AWS account. So first thing I have to do is I have to create a resource share. So I can go to resource share there, click there, and also I can give it a name, YouTube resource share. What type of resource do I want to share? So there are a lot of things that I can share, but among that I have to select subnets. Here we go. I think it's already selected. Just click that. It will show me the subnets that I can share. So obviously I can share both public and private subnets. So I will click or check both of these, and so it is added beneath. Then I will disabling access to external accounts, but I will only enable access to my development account. So I will go ahead and copy the development account ID and just add it so that my development account will be able to use these shared resources. Can give it a tag name for good measures, YouTube resource share. I'm going to go ahead and create the resource share. Well, I got an error or the authorization issue. I need to enable it from my AWS organization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my master account and enable resource sharing from my AWS organization level. So I can go to settings in AWS Resource Manager and click enable sharing with the AWS organization. Save that. Next, I will go back to my production account and make sure you do that, otherwise you aren't able to share any resources. You need to have that authorization from your master account beforehand. So let me repeat the steps again. Okay, I disable external account, add the Devo account and tag. Here you go, and now let's try again. That's perfect. So it is now created. Now I can go to my development account. See, actually I can see those shared networks or the shared sub networks. So let's go to development account and I'll go to VPC. Here you go. Now I can just search for it, VPC. And here in the VPC section, I have two VPCs. One obviously is the default VPC. Here you go. But the second one is the one that we shared from our production account. And if you scroll a little bit down, you should see the owner ID is the production account and it is marked as shared. So let's give it a name. So let's say this is my shared VPC and I'll save it and we can identify it better when we create development account resources in this shared VPC. So let's go to subnets and check whether the subnets are all available. So let me just filter it by the shared VPC. If I just click that, then I'll see the two subnets I have shared earlier from the production account. And one of these account, let's examine the route table. So this is the public route table. We have route out to the internet gateway. So let's call it as shared public subnet, and also the other one shared private subnet. Very nice. So you can see I can have a look at the resource share ARN as well, and there's a separate section called sharing, and that's good. So let's go back to our production account, check if our Elasticsearch domain is now created. So let's go to Elasticsearch, and as you can see it is now active. Perfect. So let's click into it, and I just want to see, yeah, this is the Elasticsearch VPC endpoint, and this is what we are referencing from our Lambda function to connect to it. So let's go ahead and create Lambda function. So I'll go to my desktop and create a new directory called Shared VPC demo, and this is the directory I'm going to spin up a serverless service. And in that serverless service, we'll have AWS Lambda function that talks to this Elasticsearch domain. So I'll use SLS or serverless, and the version I'm using is 1.63. I'll go ahead and create a new template. So I can just use serverless create template, and let me go there and serverless create, and this is the AWS Node.js template. And here you go, I have the serverless YAML file where all my configuration is listed. Let me do a little bit of cleaning up, removing all the comments, and I'll configuring an event. As you can remember, we are going to connect to this Lambda through an API gateway. So that's a HTTP event. So the path that invoke this Lambda, let's call it index, and the rest I will remove it. All the comments are now removed, and I'm just go ahead and find out the VPC configuration, because this Lambda has to be spin up inside the VPC. So if I go to the documentation of serverless, I should see the VPC configuration section, and there I can just copy paste the configuration to spin up a Lambda inside the VPC. So let me paste that in. Part of the configuration, I have to define security group and the subnet ID. So obviously subnet ID is our private subnet, but to find out the security group, we'll use the same security group associated with our Elasticsearch. So this is the security group of Elasticsearch. Now if I go ahead and check the inbound rules, you should see, let me just show that to you. If you go to inbound rule, all traffics are enabled or allowed by any resources that has the same security group attached, right? So that's perfect. So we'll use the same security group for our AWS Lambda as well. So then it can easily talk with our Elasticsearch. And I'll just call this VPC security group, and let's copy this security group ID and just paste that in. And next we need to define the subnet. Obviously it has to be, or it can be both public and private subnet, but in this case I will prefer private subnet. So this is the private subnet, and I'll just copy the private subnet ID and paste that in. Perfect. Next, I will make sure this method is a HTTP GET request, and I think with that we have all the configuration ready for serverless YAML. Now this is where are we going to add the code to connect to the Elasticsearch. So let's change it to index, the name of the function, and we are going to require Elasticsearch npm library at elasticsearch/elasticsearch, and we'll assign it to a constant called, let's call it, we'll destructure the client from that. So Elasticsearch client is available, and we are going to create a new Elasticsearch client with the VPC endpoint. So we have to just define the VPC endpoint under node. So I'll just go ahead and copy the VPC endpoint. So this is the VPC endpoint that we should use. Since we have enabled DNS resolution for VPC, it will be properly identified which Elasticsearch domain to connect from our private subnet. Okay, now let's create a new function called index data, and this is the function that will index some data into our Elasticsearch. And let's make it asynchronous, because we are going to await the asynchronous method. And so I just copy paste the indexing method from the library that I'm using. So it is just client.index, and we have to give the index name. So I just call it production quotes, and the body. So I'm having a quote, the character with Nedstock, and the quote is winter is coming, and I just added a stage called production. That is just some data. And then we need to refresh this index in order to access it right after creating an record. So then I will access that record. So I will index it, and I'll refresh it, then I'll access it. So here I'm going to use client.search, so the same index, and I'm going to issue a query that matches the stage to production. Well, it doesn't have to be just stage, it can be any other attribute, could be code. Say you can just search for winter, then it will just match with this record, or it could be the character, the net stack, right? But here for this demo, I will just use stage and I'll search for production. And then I will just return the result from this method. Okay, now I can just call that method from our handler function. So let me create a constant called result, and I will just await and call that method index data. Here you go. Well, I have capitalized it. Let me use camel cases here. Make it simple, index data. And then I should ideally get the result, and I will send it to the Lambda function in a attribute called message. Okay, so now I need to deploy this serverless function, and before that I will install npm. So I'll just say npm Elasticsearch, and that will install the library for me. Now this Lambda function and the API gateway should deploy to my production account. So I need to have a production user so that I can use that credential to deploy to production. So I go to IAM and I already have a user created, but I don't think you guys have. So go ahead and click add user and then give any username there. And let's say my user, and make sure you enable programmatic access and provide administration access for this demo, or else you can like make it more fine-tuned and just go ahead and then create the user. I'm not going to do that because I already have the user, so I just cancel it out. And once this user is created, you will receive the secret key and the access key. Then use serverless config credential, this CLI command. So the provider has to be AWS. And here's an example where you can copy, and then you should use the key and the secret ID. So then you have to configure it in your local machine. And after that, you can just use SLS deploy. I'll create a stage called prod for production and then deploy it. So it will be deployed in a minute. And after that, you will receive the API gateway endpoint that will invoke the Lambda function. So let's go ahead and just click whether it all works fine. So this should ideally index a record and then search for it. And here you go, it is there. So I see the production code index, and also I see the character net stack and the code. Let me refresh it, then I will see two of that. The same message because we are indexing the same thing. So if I do another refresh, I will see three messages because when we are searching it, the stage matches with all these three records. Okay, now let's go ahead and commit these changes into a GitHub repository. So I'll add all these changes and then I'll make a commit, and let's say the production initial code. And after that, I'm going to go ahead and create a new branch. So this branch, let's call it dev, because now I want to spin up the same resources, API gateway and the Lambda in my development account. And I'm going to change my index from production codes to development code. So that's a separate index. And I need to change few other things as well. The data that I'm going to index, let's change it. The stage, we'll call it development, and also the character instead of net stack we'll have Denarius, and also a quote from Denarius, and yeah, so I'm the blood of the dragon. Cool. Now remember guys, this Lambda function and the API gateway will be deployed to the production account, but it will still use the same Elasticsearch. All right, and one thing we need to do is to change the security group ID, because with VPC sharing, it's not going to share the security groups. So we need to create a separate security group for our development account. So let's go to our development account and create a new security group. And this security group will be associated with our Lambda. And there's one other thing, if you guys can remember, we need to add that security group to allow calling our Elasticsearch cluster as well. So we need to change the Elasticsearch cluster to allow this security group as well. So I'll go to VPC, we'll do step by step, and then first go to my security group section. Here we go. Okay, this is security group section, and I'll create a new security group here. Click create security group, and I'll give it a name. Let's call it development security group, and let's give it a description. Let's call it security group of the shared VPC. Now this security group should be created inside the shared VPC because security groups are VPC specific resources. And the inbound rule we don't really have to define, but outbound rule make sure it is allowed to connect to any IP address and then create it. So we have the security group ID, and I'll just copy that ID, and this is the one we need to associate with our Lambda function. So now before associating that, I will first go to production account and I'll go to Elasticsearch, and I'll make sure any resources that the security group we just created attached is able to communicate with this Elasticsearch. So I will go to the security group of our Elasticsearch. So at the moment it is allowing any other resources that has its own security group attached. But I'm going to do a slight change there. Let's go to inbound rules and edit the inbound rules. So at the moment all traffics are allowed, as I already mentioned, from the same security group, but I will edit it and then associate another rule allowing all traffic, where is it, there you go, all traffic from the new security group we have created in the dev account. And very important thing is that you can see it shows me the security group ID of the dev account while I am in the production account. So even though you can't directly use the security group of a different account, but you can reference it from a security group of another account. All right. So let me give some description there for the new security group, which is allowing our dev account to access the Elasticsearch. And with that, I'm going to save the rule. Next, let's copy the security group ID of the dev account, which is this one, dev security group ID, back to my serverless configuration file or the serverless YAML file, and replace this security group ID with the one I just copied, the dev security group ID. And the subnet ID is not going to be changed. So it is exactly the same. So it is the same private subnet of the shared VPC. So if I show you again in the subnet section of my development account, the shared VPC, and do you see the private subnet starting with 0777, and it is the 077, the same subnet ID. Perfect. So I need to create a new IAM user in the development account as well, otherwise I am not able to deploy this new Lambda and the API gateway to the development account. So I'll just go ahead and create a user as before. I'll give him administrator access or any other fine-grained access, and then create the user this time because I already don't have a pre-created user there. So then I'll just use the same configuration. I've already done that off the screen. Now I will just use SLS deploy --stage and dev. This time it will be deployed to my development account, the Lambda function and the API gateway. Here we go, and I fast forward it, and this is the endpoint that we can access the dev Lambda. I just click it and make sure I am able to access it. Let's wait for it. And here we go. And now I see the data returned from my dev index, dev codes, and the character Denarius Targaryen. Now this is great. We are accessing the same Elasticsearch, but different Elasticsearch indexes from two different AWS accounts. See, this is the prod one, and it is returning the prod related data. And you see, this is coming from the production codes index and the data from the production stage. And this is the data from our dev codes index. So this is what I want to show you guys. I hope this has been useful. I will see you in another video. Thanks for watching.